Officer Brett Calloway put handcuffs on a black woman in a cream silk dress on a Thursday afternoon in October on a public street in Hargrove, Georgia, in front of a dozen people whose phones were already recording. He told the crowd the car was stolen. He said it loudly with the practiced confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything he did while wearing that badge. He was wrong about everything, and he was about to find out in the worst way a man like him can find out, not in private, not quietly, not with any of the dignity he had decided she didn't deserve. The woman's name was Nadia Okafor Barnes. She was 42 years old. She was 11 days from her wedding. She was 18 days from being sworn in as a Superior Court judge in the same courthouse, in the same building, sitting in the same chair that had belonged to the family whose name Calloway carried into his own home every single night. He didn't know any of that. He saw a black woman in a vintage Jaguar on a sunny afternoon in a neighborhood that his father-in-law had spent 23 years deciding who belonged in and who didn't. He made a decision in about 4 seconds. He dismissed her warning. He put on the cuffs. He smirked. That smirk is what this story is about. Before we go any further, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what comes next. Now let's get into it. The car was a 1968 Jaguar E-Type in British racing green, and it was the most beautiful thing on Clement Avenue that Thursday afternoon. Chrome grille catching the October sun like a signal mirror. Cream leather interior that smelled of lanolin and thyme, and the specific care that someone gives to a thing they love deeply and deliberately. It moved through the streets of Hargrove's Riverside district with the low, unhurried authority of a car that had nothing to prove and knew it. Nadia Okafor Barnes was driving it to her final wedding dress fitting. She had polished it herself that morning. Soft cloth, slow circles hood first and working outward, and the British racing green had that deep liquid luster that only comes from doing the work by hand, not from a machine, not from a shop, but from a person who understands that some things are worth the time they take. She was thinking about her father when she saw the red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. Not racing, not urgent. A single casual pulse from a patrol car that had been moving alongside her for 4 blocks, keeping pace, watching. The kind of following that isn't technically following because there's no law against it. The kind that tells you everything about what's coming before a single word has been said. Nadia's hands settled on the steering wheel. Her breathing stayed even. Her heart did not race. She had been black in America for 42 years, and her father had been a civil rights attorney for 30 of them, and she had spent 12 years as a prosecutor, and she had learned the way you learn things that are taught to you before you understand why you need to know them exactly what the next several minutes were going to require of her. She pulled the Jaguar to the curb on Clement Avenue, turned the engine off. The silence was immediate and heavy. She watched in the side mirror as Officer Brett Calloway got out of his patrol car. He was broad across the shoulders, with a military-style haircut that was a fraction too severe for the softness of his face. The cut of a man who sees himself one way and has arranged his appearance to match the image. He walked toward her with the slow, weight-forward stride of someone who has already decided before he reaches the window that he is the most important person in this conversation. His right hand rested near his holster, not on it, near it. A casual reminder of what he was carrying and what that meant. He was maybe 35, and he had the particular settled confidence of a man who had done this many times before and had never once had to answer for it. She would learn in a few hours that he was the son-in-law of the man whose bench she was about to inherit. She didn't know that yet. She knew the hand near the holster. She knew the walk. She knew what came next. What she couldn't have known sitting in her father's car in her silk dress, the October sun warm through the windshield, was that what was about to happen on this curb was not random. The phone call that triggered it had been made 47 minutes ago. The false report had already been filed. The only variable remaining was whether she would react the way they expected her to react. If she did, the matter would be resolved quietly and quickly, and she would spend the next 18 days, too shaken and too humiliated, to walk into that courtroom without flinching. They had never met Elias Okafor's daughter. They were about to. Her father had bought the Jaguar the year she was born, 1982, the same year he passed the Georgia bar exam on his third attempt, after the first two were followed by rejection letters from firms that didn't explain themselves because they didn't feel they needed to. He called the car his proof of arrival. Not proof of wealth, not proof of success. Proof of arrival. The specific hard-won right to exist in a space that was always trying to convince you that you didn't. He polished it every Saturday morning of Nadia's childhood, and she had stood beside him in the carriage house, with her own cloth working the passenger door in small circles, the way he showed her while he talked. Not lectured, talked. About the cases he was fighting, about the clients who trusted him with the worst moments of their lives, about the way the law was a weapon that could be used for justice or for oppression. And the only question that mattered was whose hands were holding it right now, and what you were going to do about that. He died 6 years ago. A heart that quit without warning on a Tuesday evening, which was the kind of ending he would have objected to on procedural grounds. He left her the Jaguar, his law books, and a locked metal filing cabinet in his study. She knew about the law books immediately. The lawyer mentioned the filing cabinet during the reading of the will, and she had looked at it in the study, afterward ran her hand over the cold metal, and left it locked for 2 years. She wasn't ready for what was inside it. She had understood, even without opening it, that it contained something that would ask something of her. She was a prosecutor with 12 years, and a record that made the Hargrove County DA's office look better than it probably deserved. She was 11 days from marrying Marcus Barnes, who taught AP Civics at Riverside High, and had the steadiest temperament of anyone she had ever known. A man who could sit at the kitchen table at 11 at night while she worked through a case file and simply be there quiet present without needing the silence to be filled. She had met him at a fundraiser for the public defender's office. He had been the only person in the room who wasn't a lawyer, and that was immediately apparent and immediately appealing. And 8 weeks ago, she had been appointed to the Superior Court bench, taking the seat of the retiring Judge Harlan Whitmore, a man who had been there for 23 years, and whose courtroom her father had once described with the flat precision of a man who had lost cases he should have won as a room built to lose in. Whitmore had not called to congratulate her, had not written, had offered nothing, no transition meeting, no professional courtesy, no acknowledgement that this was a thing that was happening. His chambers had gone cold and silent the day her appointment was announced, and that silence told her something more useful than any congratulatory call would have. It told her he was afraid of what she was going to find when she started looking. She was thinking about all of this. Her father's voice in the carriage house, the weight of what 18 days from now would feel like, the particular quality of Whitmore's silence when Calloway reached her window. She had the window down 3 inches before he arrived. Enough to talk through, not enough to be reached. He looked at the car first. Not at her, at the car. His pale eyes moved over the chrome, the paint, the cream leather of the passenger seat visible through the glass, and something shifted in them. It wasn't admiration. It was the specific skepticism of a man who has decided that something doesn't add up, and the thing that didn't add up was the person behind the wheel. A look that said, "This doesn't belong to you." Then he looked at her. License and registration. Not a question, not preceded by a reason for the stop. Just the command flat and practiced. She had them ready in the center console front pocket, specific place, easy access. She passed them through the gap with 2 fingers. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. Steadiness was not the absence of feeling. It was a structure you built on top of whatever was actually moving inside you, and you maintained it through discipline and through knowing what the next hour was going to require. He took the documents without looking at her name, looked at the car again. "Nice car," he said. The way he said it was not a compliment. He let the sentence sit in the air, incomplete, fully intended. "It was my father's," she said. "Is there a reason for the stop, officer?" He didn't answer. He gave her a brief, assessing look. The look of a man who hasn't been asked that question before by someone who actually expects an answer, and walked back to his patrol car with her documents in his hand. 9 minutes. She counted them. She counted her breaths. 4 in 4, hold 4 out, and she watched the people on the sidewalk. A woman with a stroller had paused at the corner. 3 teenagers had stopped their phones, coming up slowly, not recording yet, but getting ready the way you get ready when you've seen this before, and you know what it usually becomes. A young man in a gray jacket at the bus stop, 19 years old, his name was Leo Drummond, was watching Calloway's car in the mirror. His phone was already out. He had been watching for 4 minutes. 9 minutes and 12 seconds after Calloway walked away, he came back. His walk was different now. Slower, more settled into itself, the weight of a man who has found what he was looking for and is about to use it. He walked to the front of the Jaguar, then to the side, then to her door, and he tapped on the glass with one finger. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle." "On what basis, officer?" He didn't answer. A small smile at the corner of his mouth. He raised his voice now, not for her, for the sidewalk. "This vehicle was reported stolen this morning. I need you to step out. Now." The Jaguar had not left the carriage house in 4 days. She had polished it herself that morning. The registration was in her name. The title was in her name. She had driven it to the courthouse twice last week. She looked at him. He looked back with the absolute practiced certainty of a man who has told this particular lie before and had it accepted. He was not embarrassed by it. He was not uncertain. He had the settled confidence of someone who knows that the machine he serves will accept his word over whoever is sitting in the car. "Officer," she said clearly, voice caring for the phones that were rising on the sidewalk, "my name is Nadia Okafor Barnes. I am a licensed Georgia attorney and a sitting prosecutor with the Hargrove County DA's office. This vehicle is registered in my name. I have presented valid documentation. I am requesting that you verify the vehicle title before taking any further action." Calloway looked at her. His expression didn't change. He tilted his head slightly, the way a man tilts his head when he's been told something he finds mildly amusing. "Lady," he said, "plenty of people carry a bar card. Doesn't mean the car's yours." He unhooked the handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around." She turned. She put her hands behind her back. The cuffs went on too tight. She felt it immediately, the metal biting into the bones of her wrists, the specific pressure of someone who was not being careless. She cataloged it, filed it, noted the degree of force, noted the time, noted the fact that there would be marks by morning. From the bus stop, Leo Drummond was recording. He had been recording since Calloway got out of the patrol car. He had the badge number, the plate, the name Calloway in block letters, and now he had the cuffs and the silk dress and the expression on Nadia's face, which was perfectly, entirely, frighteningly calm, and the voices starting up on the sidewalk. "That's not right." She gave him everything he asked for. "Lady said she's a lawyer." Calloway turned to the sidewalk with his arm extended. "Nothing to see here. Step back." He said it like a man who has never once considered the possibility that the people watching him have the right to watch. The Jaguar was impounded. Nadia placed in the back of the patrol car. She watched through the rear window as the tow truck hooked up her father's car. The British racing green, catching the afternoon light one last time before it was pulled forward and away, and she felt something move through her chest that she did not allow to reach her face. 10 minutes, she told herself. You get 10 minutes for what this feels like. Then you get to work. The Jefferson Street precinct was everything a police station is designed to be, and nothing more. Fluorescent lights at the frequency that makes you feel like you've been somewhere longer than you have. Linoleum floors in a beige that had never been chosen by anyone who cared. The smell of industrial disinfectant And beneath it, something that was not quite despair, but was in the same neighborhood, the accumulated weight of everyone who had sat in those plastic chairs and waited to find out what the machine would do with them. Desk Sergeant Roy Pruitt was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, with the tired expert face of someone who had stopped seeing people and started seeing paperwork a decade ago. He looked up when Calloway brought her in. His eyes moved over the silk dress, the cuffs the level set of her jaw, and he made no visible assessment. He reached for the intake form. "What you got?" "Grand Theft Auto," Calloway said, with the particular note in his voice of a man setting something down with satisfaction. "Caught her in a vintage Jag on Clement. Vehicle reported stolen this morning." Pruitt took the paperwork without looking at it, looked at Nadia. She looked back at him. Her voice was measured and clear. "Sergeant, I need to inform you that your officer has made a serious error. That vehicle is registered in my name. I am a licensed Georgia attorney and an officer of this court. My name is Nadia Okafor Barnes, and I am requesting access to legal representation." Pruitt looked at Calloway. Calloway shrugged. One shoulder. The body language of a man who has heard all of this before and has never once had to adjust his position because of it. "She's been saying that the whole time, Serge. Everybody's got a story." Pruitt looked back at Nadia. He sighed the theatrical sigh of a man performing Patience. "You'll get your phone call," he said. After processing. The processing was precise and deliberate. Fingerprints, mugshot, earrings, removed shoes taken. Her simple gold hoops, her mother's graduation gift, dropped into a plastic bag. The mugshot flash was bright and final. Through all of it, she was silent. She was building a timeline in her mind. Every name, every timestamp, every piece of property removed, every word said with the same methodical attention she brought to preparing a case for trial. Because that was what this was. She was placed in a holding cell on the east corridor. The guard who locked the door didn't look at her. The bolt slid home with a sound that was heavier than she had expected. Not loud, just heavy with the finality of something that has been done many times before, to many different people, and means the same thing every time. The cell was concrete and cold. Metal bench, toilet, a polished metal surface above it that functioned as a mirror. She sat on the bench and felt the cold through the silk. She looked at her reflection in the metal. She gave herself 10 minutes. She had said 10 minutes in the patrol car, and she meant it not as a coping mechanism, not as a way of managing grief, but as a deliberate, conscious act. Her father had told her something once that she had carried for 20 years. "You are allowed to be a person, Nadia. You are not allowed to let being a person stop you from doing the work. Feel it, then move." So she sat in her silk dress with the handcuff marks on her wrists, and she let herself feel it. The humiliation of it. The weight of being processed, like a number, a file, a body the machine had swallowed. The helplessness of knowing exactly what was happening and exactly why it was wrong, and not being able to access any remedy, because the bolt was in the lock and the guard wasn't looking. She felt it, all of it, the full weight of it. When the 10 minutes were up, she took one breath, then another. What remained was something clear and cold and directional. Not anger, not fear. Something more useful than either. The victim was done. The prosecutor had work to do. One call. She had been telling clients this for 12 years. You get one call, use it correctly. She had also told them the station monitors everything. Plan what you say before you pick up the phone. She called Marcus. Not her attorney. Not the DA's office. A call to your fiancé reads as personal. It reads as scared as a plea for comfort. She was going to use their assumptions against them. 3 rings. Nadia. His voice was immediate warm, and underneath it, the particular quality of a man who had been mildly worried for an hour, and is relieved to hear the line connect. You missed the fitting. I was about to, Marcus, she said. I need you to listen carefully. Don't speak until I'm done. A pause. She heard him go still. He knew this voice. She had used it once before, calling him from a courthouse parking lot after losing a case she should have won, and he had listened then too without interrupting, without filling the silence with himself. "I'm at the Jefferson Street precinct," she said. "I've been arrested. The officer's name is B. Calloway, badge number 2247. I've been charged with grand theft auto. The charge is false. I need you to call Dominic Reeves and tell him everything I've told you, the badge number, the precinct, the charge. Tell him to come now." She heard Marcus adjust, not panic, but a rapid reconfiguration of the next several hours. "Okay," he said. "I'm calling him right now. Nadia." "One more thing," she said. "My father's study. The locked filing cabinet behind the left bookshelf. The key is taped to the bottom of the second drawer of his desk. Get the files, Marcus. All of them. Bring them to Dominic's office." A silence. "The files," he repeated. His voice had gone quiet and more serious, the voice of a man who has just understood that the situation is significantly larger than he initially measured. "All of them," she said. "And Marcus." The guard appeared at the bars. "Time's up." She looked at the guard. Back at the phone. "I love you," she said, and the guard reached past her and ended the call. She sat back on the bench. The first move had been made. The pieces were in motion. The machine had swallowed her, and it had done so confident in what it was. It didn't know what she was carrying. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps, quick and purposeful. Leather expensive, the walk of someone moving through an institutional space on his own terms. She had learned a long time ago to read people from the sound of how they moved through difficult places. Dominic Reeves appeared at the cell door. 51, compact, close-cropped gray at the temples. A face that never quite arrived at a readable expression. Dark charcoal suit. He had not put it on in a hurry. Behind him was Sergeant Pruitt, looking considerably less comfortable than he had at intake. And behind Pruitt, Marcus, his eyes finding hers through the bars and moving through love and rage and a helplessness he was actively suppressing, jaw tight, hands loose at his sides, doing what she had asked him to do, which was not make it worse. Dominic did not look at Nadia first. He looked at Pruitt. "Sergeant." His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room more completely than a raised voice would. "You are currently holding a sitting member of the Hargrove County Prosecutor's Office and a judge-elect to the Superior Court on a stolen vehicle report that will not survive 30 seconds of legal scrutiny. You have held her for 2 hours and 21 minutes without timely access to counsel. You have impounded her personal property without legitimate cause. Every minute she remains in this cell, the personal liability exposure for you, for Officer Calloway, and for this city compounds at a rate I assure you, neither of you has calculated correctly. So you are going to open this door right now, and we are going to complete the paperwork, and then I am going to spend the next several weeks ensuring that what happened today has every consequence it deserves." Pruitt's face went through several things quickly. He looked at Dominic. He looked at Nadia, sitting calm and still on the cold bench in her ruined silk dress. He looked at the door. He fumbled for his keys. The door opened. The release was graceless paperwork. A plastic bag, no apology offered, none expected. Nadia put her earrings back in. The gold was cold. Marcus took her hand gently and stopped when his thumb found the marks on her wrists, the swollen, bruised skin, the welts the cuffs had left. He said nothing. His jaw tightened once, and then he let it go, and she felt him make the decision not to give this place the satisfaction of his reaction. They walked out into the cool evening. The air was sharp and clean in the way that outside air always is, after you've been somewhere bad. And Nadia stopped on the precinct steps for a moment and breathed it in. "The charge will be dropped by morning," Dominic said, walking toward his car. "I'll file tonight." "That's not enough," Nadia said. He looked at her. Dropping the charge is the quiet resolution, she said. It's what they want. Make the problem go away. Let me be relieved it's over. And I walk into that courtroom in 18 days, damaged and grateful, and too careful to do what I came to do. She got into the back of Dominic's car. Marcus slid in beside her. I want Calloway's badge. I want to know who filed that report and why they felt protected enough to do it in broad daylight. And I want to pull on that thread until I find out exactly how deep it runs. Dominic was quiet, looking at her in the rearview mirror. Then we need to start tonight, he said, and changed direction. 3 blocks of silence. Then Marcus spoke. His voice was careful and quiet the way he spoke in the classroom, when he had just said something he needed the room to sit with. The name on the badge, he said. Calloway. Nadia was quiet. B. Calloway, Marcus said. Brett Calloway. She had seen it the moment the officer reached her window. She had logged it and set it aside, because in the moment she had needed to focus on her hands and her breathing and the record she was building. She had sat with the implication in the holding cell during her 10 minutes. She had arrived at a conclusion that she did not want to be right about, but knew she was. Harlan Whitmore's daughter, she said, married a man named Brett Calloway. 4 years ago. It was in the courthouse newsletter. She paused. I read it at the time. The car was quiet. The words settled into the silence with the specific weight of something that reorders everything you thought you were looking at. Dominic's hands were steady on the wheel. Marcus had gone very still beside her. It was not a random stop. It was a message. Harlan Whitmore had spent 23 years on that bench and had used it the way her father had always said. It was being used as a tool for maintaining a particular order, for protecting the officers who kept that order, for ensuring that the cases brought before him arrived at outcomes that served the people who had installed him and sustained him. He had not congratulated her appointment. He had gone cold and silent for 3 weeks. And then, his son-in-law had been sent with a false report filed from somewhere close at a specific time, with a specific target, to deliver a message clear enough that it didn't need a word of explanation. Back down. We were here before you. We will be here after you. Nobody in the car spoke for a full 30 seconds. The city moved past the windows. Streetlights. A gas station. A woman walking a dog on the far sidewalk. The ordinary Thursday evening of a city that didn't yet know what had been set in motion inside it. They miscalculated, Nadia said. Her voice was quiet, not angry, certain. They thought they were dealing with someone who would want everything to go smoothly, she said. Someone who would be grateful to have the charge dropped. Someone who would decide that 18 days before her swearing in was not the moment to make enemies. She looked out the window. They didn't know about the files. Marcus took her hand. Dominic put on his turn signal. Aldous Pemberton, he said. It was not a question. Aldous Pemberton, she confirmed. Judge Aldous Pemberton lived in a craftsman bungalow on a street lined with oak trees planted in the 1930s trees that had grown in the decades since into the kind of canopy that makes an entire block feel like a different century. The house was modest and immaculate. White trim, dark shutters, a covered porch with 2 chairs on it that had held a great many serious conversations and looked capable of holding more. He was 81 years old. He had been the first black Superior Court judge in Hargrove County, appointed in 1979, after a legal career that had required, as he once put it, not just excellence, but the willingness to be excellent in rooms that were working very hard to convince you that you didn't belong. He had retired 14 years ago. The legal community had never quite figured out how to move on without him. He was still consulted, still sought out, still the person you called when the situation required not just competence, but wisdom. And wisdom in Hargrove meant Aldous Pemberton. The lights were on when they pulled up. Before Marcus could reach the door, it opened. Pemberton stood in the doorway and looked at them. He was a small, slender man who moved carefully and precisely, with eyes that took in everything and shared most of nothing. He looked at Nadia the way a doctor looks at a patient, not with pity, but with the focused attention of someone determining exactly what has happened and what it requires. His gaze moved to her wrists, stayed there a moment. He nodded. Once. Slow. I heard, he said. His voice was a dry, quiet baritone, the voice of a man who has spent decades choosing his words. Come inside. He led them to his study. Old paper leather, the ghost of pipe tobacco from a decade ago. The walls were working books, broken spines, paper markers, pencil in the margins. A desk organized with the precision of a man who knows where everything is and has always known. And in the corner, a locked filing cabinet that she noticed immediately because it was the only thing in the room that was locked. He poured 3 glasses of water, handed one to Nadia first. Drink, he said. It was an order. She drank. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Don't skip anything. She told him, the way she told cases linear precise, without editorializing, because the facts were the argument, and they didn't need her feelings added to them to be damning. The stop. The 9-minute wait. Calloway's voice carrying to the sidewalk. The false report. The line he'd said after she identified herself as a lawyer. The processing. The holding cell. The name on the badge. When she finished, the room was quiet. Pemberton sat with his fingertips pressed together in front of him and looked at the middle distance. He stayed like that for nearly 30 seconds, which felt longer. Brett Calloway. He said the way you say a name that is simultaneously unsurprising and enraging. I have been watching that young man since he joined the force 5 years ago. He came with a recommendation from Harlan Whitmore's office. I thought at the time it was simple nepotism. He paused. It was more than that. He stood and walked to the filing cabinet, a small brass key from his watch chain. He removed a folder that was thick and old, its edges worn soft with handling. The tab label was in neat block letters. Whitmore. He set it on the desk in front of them. 27 years, he said. I started this when Whitmore was still a prosecutor, and I was still on the bench. I began to notice patterns in the cases he brought, patterns in what evidence was presented and what wasn't, whose testimony was considered reliable and whose wasn't. He built his career on relationships with officers who would provide testimony that supported his theory regardless of what the evidence actually showed. When he moved to the bench, the protection ran both directions. His officers got favorable rulings and dismissed complaints. He got reliable witnesses and a courtroom that functioned exactly as intended. He opened the folder. Brett Calloway has 11 use-of-force complaints in 5 years. Everyone dismissed by the same internal review board, chaired during that entire period by a man whose son served under the protection of officers connected to Whitmore's network. 3 civil suits for wrongful stops and improper searches, all settled quietly by the city. He looked at Nadia directly. In every single case, the complainant was a person of color, in a vehicle the officer decided they had no business driving. A new SUV, a restored truck, a late-model Cadillac. He closed the folder gently. Your father's Jaguar was not the first. It was simply the first time they chose someone who could fight back on their level. The room was quiet again. There's more, Pemberton said. He produced a single sheet of paper, a list of names in 2 columns. The officers who worked consistently with Calloway. No formal organization. No name, no insignia. Just loyalty and cover. They lose body cam footage at 3 times the department average. Complaint investigations involving any of them are routed to the same 2 reviewers who have never in 5 years sustained a single finding against any of them. Dominic had his pen out. This is RICO territory. It is, Pemberton agreed. But the local DA will not touch it. Craig Fenwick has been running on police union endorsements since his first election. Moving against Whitmore's network would end his career, and he knows it. Then we go above him, Nadia said. She had been listening without speaking for the last 15 minutes, which was what she always did when someone who knew more than her was talking, and she had been building quietly the architecture of what came next. She could see it now. She could see where the pieces connected. U.S. Attorney's Office, Dominic said. Public integrity. Pattern and practice case. Potentially conspiracy. We need more than old files, Nadia said. We need something current, something that ties Calloway's actions today directly to the larger structure. Something that shows intent, not just pattern. She paused. We need the source of that stolen vehicle report. They moved to Dominic's office, 7th floor of the Meridian building. Quiet at this hour. The particular silence of a building that has emptied out after hours. The main conference room had a long mahogany table and Dominic's paralegal. Petra was already there with a laptop and the slightly over-caffeinated focus of someone who had been called and understood that the night was going to be long. Marcus unboxed the files. He had retrieved them from Elias Okafor's study, exactly as described. The key taped under the second drawer, the cabinet behind the left bookshelf, and he had brought everything. 2 boxes of folders, each organized in his father-in-law's handwriting, with the meticulous attention of a man who had spent 30 years believing that the documentation would eventually matter, that the record would eventually be used, that the day would come when someone opened these boxes and found inside them what the system had refused to acknowledge. Tonight was that day. Marcus opened the first box and began building a timeline at one end of the table. Legal pad markers, dates down one axis, incident types across the other. Working with the focused, careful attention he brought to primary source documents in the classroom. The names of officers, judges, dismissed, complaints, settled lawsuits forming a grid that told the story clearly enough to show a jury without explanation. Pemberton sat in the corner chair with a glass of water and watched. Occasionally he said something that saved them 20 minutes. What emerged over the next 3 hours was a machine that had been running for nearly 3 decades. Not crude, not obvious. It had relied on relationships and paperwork and the institutional amnesia that develops when the same people review the same situations year after year and always arrive at the same conclusion. Whitmore had not created it from nothing. He had found a structure already disposed toward a certain kind of order and had made himself indispensable to its maintenance. In return, the structure had protected him. At 11:40, Petra looked up from her screen. The stolen vehicle report, she said. Everyone looked at her. Called into non-emergency dispatch at 2:17 this afternoon, 47 minutes before the traffic stop. The number is registered to a cell phone. She paused one beat. The account holder is Diane Calloway. The room was quiet. Diane Calloway was Brett Calloway's wife. She was also Harlan Whitmore's daughter. The stolen vehicle report had been filed by the sitting judge's own daughter 47 minutes before her husband pulled Nadia over on Clement Avenue. This was not a rogue cop on a power trip. This was coordinated, planned that morning, executed that afternoon, with a false police report as the mechanism, Brett Calloway as the instrument, and Harlan Whitmore as the protection that made both of them feel safe enough to do it in broad daylight to a judge-elect with phones recording on the sidewalk. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Dominic said quietly, "That converts the civil rights violation into conspiracy. Filing a false police report to facilitate the wrongful arrest of a specific individual with the motive of intimidating her from assuming public office." He looked at the ceiling. "That's federal. Multiple counts." "We still need a direct witness," Nadia said. "Someone who can put Whitmore's knowledge of the plan on the record. The phone record shows Diane Calloway made the call. It doesn't prove Whitmore knew." Pemberton set down his glass. "Then we find one," he said. The text arrived on Dominic's phone at 12:43. An unknown number. 14 words. I work for Judge Whitmore. I know what happened today. I want to talk. Dominic showed it to Nadia. She read it once. Meet them, she said. He texted back a time and a place. The Daily Grind on Forsyth Street, 6:30 in the morning before the courthouse crowd. He didn't give a name. At 6:20 the next morning, Nadia and Dominic were in the back booth when the door opened and a young woman came in. She was perhaps 26, with the look of someone who had spent the night making a decision and was committed to it and frightened by what that meant. She was wearing courthouse staff clothes, professional enough for the building, forgettable enough not to be noticed. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the coffee Dominic had ordered and spoke in a low, quick voice. Her name was Renata Bloom. She had been Judge Whitmore's judicial clerk for 2 years. She had been writing things down for 6 months, a personal journal. Nothing on courthouse equipment, just dates and quotes, and overheard conversations, since she had understood gradually and with increasing clarity what the chambers she was working in actually were. She had been in Whitmore's outer office the previous morning. Diane Calloway had come in to see her father. Not unusual, she came in often and had been on her phone without lowering her voice. She had said clearly and distinctly, "Brett is going to make sure she gets the message before she even gets to walk in the door. Daddy will sort out whatever needs sorting afterward." She had laughed when she said it, the casual laugh of someone discussing a foregone conclusion. Renata slid her journal across the table. 6 months of entries. Nadia opened it and read 3 pages without expression. Then she closed it and looked at Renata. "You understand what testifying to this means," Nadia said. Renata's hands tightened on the cup. "I have a brother," she said, "serving 8 years on a conviction from Whitmore's courtroom. I've been looking at the case file for 2 months. The arresting officer was in Calloway's network. The testimony had 3 inconsistencies that were never addressed." She looked at Nadia steadily. "I'm not doing this because I'm brave. I'm doing it because it's the only thing I can do." Nadia looked at her for a moment. "If you cooperate formally, Dominic's office files for witness protection with the U.S. Attorney before anything else happens. Your employer is notified that you are a cooperating witness in a federal investigation, which means touching you becomes a federal crime. And your brother's case goes to independent review." She paused. "I give you my word." A silence. The coffee shop was quiet around them. "Okay," Renata said. Then again, more settled. "Okay." By 7 that morning, they were back at Dominic's office. Marcus had been there all night, having declined to go home when Nadia suggested it. He had slept 2 hours in a waiting room chair and was on his second coffee and had covered one end of the conference table in a timeline that made 3 decades of documented misconduct visible in a single glance, the kind of clarity that takes a history teacher to produce the translation of accumulated facts into a form that makes the pattern impossible to look away from. Pemberton looked at it for 5 minutes when he arrived. "Your father was a teacher," he said to Marcus. "High school civics." Pemberton nodded slowly. "He was already a lawyer," he said. "He just didn't know it yet." Dominic had spent part of the night on calls. People he didn't name favors, discussed in the elliptical language of professionals who understand that specificity and obligation should remain separate for as long as possible. By 8:30, he had a preliminary meeting scheduled with the U.S. Attorney's Office for 9:30 the same morning. Nadia spent the hour between in Dominic's office constructing what she thought of as the load-bearing argument, the specific set of facts that could not be explained away, that could not be attributed to error or carelessness, that required a deliberate and organized structure of corruption to produce. 3 facts formed the core Diane Calloway's phone record, placing the false report 47 minutes before the stop. Calloway's documented history of targeting people of color in premium vehicles, with every complaint dismissed by the same reviewers. And Renata Bloom's direct testimony of Diane Calloway, stating in Whitmore's chambers that the arrest was coordinated, and that Whitmore would handle the aftermath. Those three facts together were not everything, but they were the frame, and the Pemberton and Okafor files were the filling. Leo Drummond's footage had reached 400,000 views overnight. 3 local stations had reached out to Dominic's office. He had responded to none of them. The story broke on their timeline, not a reporter's. Nadia looked out the window at Hargrove waking up in the October morning. 9 days until her wedding. 16 until the swearing in. The filing cabinet was open on the conference table, and the documents inside it were already changing what the next several months were going to look like for this city, for this courthouse, for a great many people who were confident they were safe. They had made the mistake that concentrated power always eventually makes. They had assumed that the people they were harming weren't documenting, weren't watching, weren't waiting for the right moment. Elias Okafor had been watching for 30 years. His daughter had the files. And now, she had a federal appointment the following morning. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sandra Voss was 47, direct in the way that people who handle complex cases become direct out of necessity and not easily moved. She listened without interrupting professional, and when they finished, she asked 2 questions, which told Nadia she had been paying close attention to everything. The first was about the Diane Calloway phone record and how they had obtained it. Dominic explained. She nodded. The second was the important one. Could they demonstrate a connection between Calloway's actions on Clement Avenue and Whitmore's conduct on the bench? Not just a family relationship and a phone record, but a documented pattern of Whitmore providing judicial cover for officers in this network. Pemberton answered. He spoke for 12 minutes from the folder he had brought, citing case numbers, dates, and 3 defendants who had filed complaints against Calloway-connected officers had those complaints dismissed under Whitmore's oversight and been prosecuted on Whitmore's bench with outcomes that did not survive independent scrutiny. One of them was Renata Bloom's brother, whose case Pemberton had flagged 18 months ago in a letter to the State Judicial Review Board that had produced no response. Voss looked at Pemberton for a long moment when he finished. "You have been sitting on this for 18 months, she said. "I have been sitting on it for 27 years, he said. "I was waiting for something that made it actionable. Yesterday provided that." Voss straightened the documents on the table in front of her, placed her hands flat on top of them. "I'm opening a preliminary inquiry," she said. "All original documentation preserved and transferred through proper chain of custody. Cooperating witness formally processed through witness protection before anything else. Nothing public while the inquiry is active." She looked at Nadia. "Nothing." "I understand," Nadia said. Voss stood. Then she paused. "Judge Okafor Barnes," she said, using the title Nadia didn't yet officially hold in a way that felt deliberate. "Your father's name is in 3 of these files. Elias Okafor. I'm familiar with his work." She picked up her copy of the documents. He would have found this satisfying. She left the room. Pemberton sat back. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the ceiling. "Now, we protect the evidence," he said. "And we wait. And while we wait, we prepare. Because what comes next will move fast." The stolen vehicle charge against Nadia Okafor Barnes was dropped at 9:15 the following morning, before Dominic even filed his motion. The precinct's legal liaison called in the tone of someone performing a favor. A clerical error in the vehicle report system. An administrative issue. No admission of wrongdoing. Entirely routine. Dominic thanked the liaison politely and hung up. Then he filed the civil rights lawsuit. The complaint ran 47 pages. It named Calloway Sergeant Pruitt, the precinct commander, and the city of Hargrove. It documented the traffic stop, the false report, the excessive restraint force evidenced by the injuries to Nadia's wrists, the denial of timely legal counsel, and most critically, the demonstrated premeditation, evidenced by Diane Calloway's phone record, showing the false report filed 47 minutes before the stop. That element converted the lawsuit from a misconduct complaint into a conspiracy allegation in the civil system, which moves on its own timeline and cannot be silenced by an administrative dismissal. The lawsuit was filed at 11. Leo Drummond's footage was released publicly at 11:15, alongside a single statement from Dominic's office that mentioned nothing about the federal inquiry, only that they were pursuing all available legal remedies for the wrongful arrest and civil rights violations suffered by Judge-elect Nadia Okafor Barnes on October 14th. By noon, the footage had 2 million views. By 2 o'clock, a message arrived from Harlan Whitmore's personal attorney. Phrased in the careful language of legal correspondence, it contained underneath the phrasing a clear and unmistakable suggestion that Nadia might want to consider a less aggressive approach to resolution, given the professional community she was about to join, and the disruption that the current situation was causing to all parties involved. Dominic read it to Nadia word by word. "Forward it to Sandra Voss," Nadia said. Unedited. The message arrived at Voss's office at 2:47. She called Dominic at 4:15. "We're moving from preliminary inquiry to full investigation," she said. "The witness intimidation attempt through counsel accelerates our timeline. Subpoenas to the precinct by end of week." She paused. "Tell your client," she said, "that she made the right call." The federal subpoenas arrived at Jefferson Street on a Friday morning, and their effect was immediate. Investigators appeared at the records department and requested body camera archives, dispatch logs, and complaint files for a 5-year period. The archives were pulled before anyone could request an administrative review. 3 officers were identified through cell records as having coordinated communications with Calloway on the day of the stop and in the days following, during which their personal devices showed activity consistent with deletion attempts that the forensic team documented before the deletion was complete. Calloway was suspended the same afternoon. His attorney released a statement calling the stop routine and the investigation politically motivated. The statement was released almost simultaneously, with Leo Drummond's footage passing 5 million views, which meant a significant number of people were forming their own opinions about what routine looked like, and the statement was not aging well in the comment sections. Whitmore's chambers were subpoenaed the following Tuesday. The emails Renata Bloom had quietly copied over 6 months' correspondence between Whitmore and the police union president, internal memos discussing complaint, handling for specific officers, a thread between Whitmore and the DA about the disposition of 3 cases touching both their jurisdictions, were formally turned over to Voss's office, with Renata present and her attorney beside her. Craig Fenwick lasted 8 days after the subpoenas before his own attorney advised him that cooperation was his best option. He provided records of 3 cases in which Whitmore had, from the bench, communicated specific expectations about prosecutorial strategy in ways that constituted improper judicial conduct. Those 3 cases, added to the Pemberton and Okafor documentation, gave Voss's team a documented pattern of misconduct covering 11 years across hundreds of cases involving an unknown but significant number of people whose convictions now required independent review. Renata Bloom's brother was the first name on the review list. Independent counsel examined his case over a weekend. The conviction was vacated on a Wednesday morning. He walked out of the Hargrove County Correctional Facility at 11:15 into a cool November morning and found his sister waiting at the gate. She held him the way you hold someone you have been trying to get back for a long time. Neither of them said anything for a while. Nadia heard about it from Dominic by text. She was in her home office reviewing case files for her first week on the bench. She read the text twice, set the phone face down, sat very still for 1 minute. Then she picked it up and texted back, "Tell her I said thank you." The machine, for so long a closed circuit running on loyalty and paperwork, and the accumulated protection of years, was being forced open. The documents her father had kept, and the documents Pemberton had kept, and the courage of a 26-year-old clerk who had written things down in a personal journal for 6 months, had accomplished what 30 years of individual complaints and individual lawsuits had. Not they had given the federal system enough to hold the entire structure up to the light at once, and the structure could not survive the light. Brett Calloway was at home on administrative suspension badge, surrendered, awaiting the outcome of the federal inquiry, when 2 men in dark jackets knocked on his door on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the arrest. He opened the door in sweatpants and a department-issued t-shirt coffee cup in his hand. He had the particular look of a man who has been telling himself for 3 weeks that this is going to work out, that it always works out, that the people he had counted on for protection had protected him before and would protect him now. One of the men showed him a document. Federal indictment. 4 counts. Calloway's face did what faces do when the thing they've been refusing to believe becomes a physical object you can hold. The coffee cup lowered slowly. He read the document. He looked up. "I want to call my attorney," he said. "You can do that at the precinct," the man said. He was processed through Jefferson Street, the same precinct, the same intake desk, the same linoleum floors, the same fluorescent lights. Sergeant Pruitt was on shift. He looked up when Calloway was brought in, the way he had looked up when Nadia was brought in briefly without expression, the practiced face of a man who processes people and not situations. But this time he looked a beat longer. His badge was surrendered, formally placed in an evidence bag and sealed in front of him. His service weapon the same. He sat in the processing area in his sweatpants while the paperwork was completed, and the officers on shift did what officers do when one of their own is on the wrong side of the desk. They found reasons to be somewhere else. Eyes on screens, voices low, nobody looking. The indictment read, "Deprivation of rights under color of law. Conspiracy to file a false police report. Conspiracy to intimidate a judicial candidate from assuming public office. Civil rights violations." His attorney would spend the next several months attempting to make these charges sound complicated. The footage, the phone record, and Renata Bloom's testimony would make them very simple. He was led out through the front of the precinct. Not the side entrance, not quietly. Through the front where the community he had spent 5 years in could see him. The same man who had stood on a sidewalk on Clement Avenue, with his hand near his holster, voice raised for an audience certain of his authority and his protection. The smirk was gone. It was a Saturday in late October, warm for the season. The kind of afternoon the South occasionally produces in fall, as if by apology for the summer. Golden light, the air carrying fallen leaves, and something faintly sweet from the row of magnolias along the back fence. The sky was the specific shade of blue that a painter would call impossible, and a photographer would call once in a lifetime. The ceremony was in the backyard of her father's house. Not a venue, not a hotel. The backyard her grandfather had planted with the oak tree her father had climbed as a child, which now provided shade for 30 folding chairs and a small arch of white flowers that Marcus's sister had assembled that morning, with the focused competence of a woman who treats every task as worth doing correctly. The Jaguar was parked under the oak tree. She had retrieved it from the impound lot 2 days after the arrest, driven it home, parked it in the carriage house, and not looked at it for 3 days. Then, on the morning of the wedding, she had gone to the carriage house at 6 o'clock and spent 2 hours polishing it. The same slow circles, starting at the hood, working outward. The scratch on the passenger door was still there, a thin, pale line where Calloway's handcuff key had caught the panel during the arrest. She had looked at it for a long time. She had run her finger along it. She had decided to leave it. It was part of the car's story now. It was part of her story. You didn't erase the things that had happened to you. You carried them forward, and you let them mean what they meant. Aldous Pemberton officiated. He stood under the white arch in a dark suit and read the words of the ceremony in his dry, precise baritone. And he looked at Nadia and Marcus with the eyes of a man who has seen a great many things over 81 years and is genuinely grateful for the moments that are good. Renata Bloom was in the third row. Her brother was beside her, thin and quiet, holding his program card with both hands, looking at everything around him with the careful attention of a man who has been in a concrete room for a long time and is still learning to trust what he's seeing. Leo Drummond was in the back row. He was wearing a new shirt and had his phone in his jacket pocket, face down and silent. He had filmed an injustice. He was here to witness the other thing. Marcus had written his own vows. She hadn't known they had agreed on traditional language, and when he began, she understood immediately why he had changed his mind. He talked about Elias Okafor. He talked about a man he had never met, but had come to know through the files and the car, and the things Nadia said in her sleep when she was processing something too large for her waking mind. He said he understood now what it meant to carry a legacy forward, not as a weight, but as a direction, and he wanted to walk in that direction with her. She cried. She had not expected to. She had not cried since the holding cell had not allowed it. But this she could not contain and did not try to. She let it happen the way she had let the 10 minutes happen, fully without apology. And then she took a breath and said her own vows in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the backyard. And perhaps she allowed herself to believe a little further than that. After the ceremony, when the chairs had been rearranged and the food was out and the evening light had gone from gold to amber, she walked to the Jaguar under the oak tree. She stood beside it and ran her hand along the hood. Marcus appeared behind her and stood close, the warmth of him present, without either of them needing to speak. He would have loved this, she said. She meant her father. He did love this, Marcus said. He built the house. He planted the garden. He kept the files. He knew what they were for, even when you didn't. He paused. He was here the whole time. She looked at the scratch on the passenger door. She was going to drive this car to the courthouse on her first day on the bench. She had decided that 3 weeks ago, 7 days after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning in early November. Nadia Okafor Barnes stood in the Hargrove County Superior Court courtroom, 3 Harlan Whitmore's courtroom for 23 years, and prepared to take the oath. The room was full. Her family colleagues, Dominic Pemberton in the front row, Renata beside him with her brother, who was wearing a tie and looking at the ceiling when he first walked in, and then looking at the empty bench for a long time. People from the neighborhood where she had grown up. People from the legal community who had watched her career. People who had seen Leo Drummond's footage and come to a courthouse on a Tuesday morning because they wanted to be present for what came next. She had been in this courtroom dozens of times as a prosecutor. She had stood at the prosecution table and presented arguments and watched Whitmore read his rulings from the bench with the unhurried certainty of a man whose authority in this room was absolute and who knew it. She had always felt the weight of that authority, the way the room was arranged to produce it. The high bench, the angle of the lights, the formal portraits on the wall. She looked at the wall behind the bench. The portrait of Harlan Whitmore was gone. She had submitted that instruction to the court administrator in writing 3 days ago, the first official action she had taken in her capacity as judge-elect. The hook where it had hung for 23 years was empty. The wall behind the bench was bare, for now. The presiding judge, Honorable Claudette Pryor, called the room to order. She asked for Nadia Okafor Barnes to approach. Nadia approached. She placed her left hand on the Bible her father had carried to law school. Marcus was holding it. She had to turn slightly to put her hand on it, and when she turned, she looked at him. He was holding the Bible with both hands and looking at her with the expression she had seen on his face in the backyard of the house on the evening of the wedding, the expression of a man who knows exactly where he is and what it means and is grateful beyond the reach of language. She raised her right hand. Judge Pryor read the oath. To support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Georgia, to administer justice without respect to persons, to do equal right to the poor and to the rich. She had read these words dozens of times. She knew them by memory, but hearing them aloud in this room, in this moment, with her father's Bible in Marcus's hands, and Pemberton in the front row, and Renata beside him, and Renata's brother, who had walked out of a prison built on the decisions of the man whose chair she was now taking. The words were not familiar. They were a charge. They were a direction. They were an instruction from something larger than this room about what this room was supposed to be. "I do," she said, clear and steady, carrying to the back of the gallery without effort. The room held one beat of silence. Then it began to applaud. She turned to face them. She saw Pemberton. First, he was not applauding. He was nodding slow and certain, the particular nod of a man who has been waiting a very long time for something and is watching it arrive. She saw Renata, who was applauding with the specific fervor of someone for whom this moment is personal, in a way they had not fully let themselves feel until it was actually happening. She saw Renata's brother looking at the bench with an expression that was doing many things at once and not hiding any of them. She turned to the bench. She sat down in it for the first time. Then she turned to the court administrator, who was standing to the left with a framed document in his hands, waiting as she had instructed for this moment. "Please proceed," she said. He walked to the wall behind the bench and hung the frame where Whitmore's portrait had been. He centered it, leveled it, and stepped back. A framed copy of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." The words her father had quoted to her when she was 7 years old. The words she had asked him why the law didn't do what it said. The words he had told her the law was not the problem. The law was precise and clear. The people responsible for applying it were the problem, and the solution was to become one of those people and apply it correctly. The room was quiet. Then the gallery rose. The consequences arrived in the deliberate institutional sequence of a system working correctly. Not fast, not dramatic, but irreversible. Brett Calloway was indicted on 4 federal counts. He was terminated from the Hargrove Police Department. The morning the indictment was unsealed badge and service weapon collected at the door by the new precinct commander. His attorney spent months attempting to make the charges sound complicated. The footage, the phone record, and Renata's testimony made them simple. He accepted a plea agreement 14 months after the arrest. Federal sentencing guidelines for his charges 3 to 5 years. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same restraints, the same loss of freedom he had decided to impose on a woman in a silk dress on a sunny Thursday afternoon. The irony was precise and final. Diane Calloway pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and conspiracy charges. 3 years supervised probation. A permanent bar from any law enforcement adjacent activity. She had believed her father would make it disappear. She had understood correctly how things had worked for 23 years. She had not accounted for the filing cabinet. Harlan Whitmore was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. Voss made the strategic decision not to charge him criminally. The evidence, while substantial, would produce a difficult trial. The consequences she chose instead were permanent. His pension was revoked following the Judicial Conduct Review Board's formal finding of misconduct across 11 years and hundreds of cases. His portrait had already come off the wall of Courtroom 3 before the finding was issued. His name was removed from the ceremonial alumni list of the Hargrove County Bar Association. He gave no public statement. His attorney released 2 sentences. He moved out of Hargrove 6 months after the investigation concluded quietly, and without announcement, a man who had been the most powerful person in the county's legal system and was now someone people mentioned in past tense in courthouse corridors. 3 officers in Calloway's network were charged with evidence tampering and conspiracy. Plea agreements terminated convicted federal supervision. The precinct was restructured under a consent decree, independent oversight of all use of force complaints, mandatory body camera retention without internal deletion authority, quarterly civilian review board reporting. The ordinance establishing the review board passed 14-1. The dissenting vote did not run for re-election. Fenwick, the DA, did not seek another term. His cooperation kept him out of federal court, but the testimony it required against people he had worked beside for 15 years became public, and his political career ended as a practical matter. His successor was a woman who had spent 9 years as a public defender. The independent case review Nadia had requested examined 47 cases from Whitmore's courtroom involving testimony from network-connected officers. 19 convictions were vacated or sentences reduced. Renata's brother was the first. He enrolled at the community college on the east side of Hargrove and was studying paralegal studies. He wanted to understand the thing that had been used against him. Leo Drummond's footage ended the year at 9 million views. He declined 3 television interviews. He said the footage was the thing that mattered, not him, and he'd rather let it be the story. He was 19 years old and already understood something that takes most journalists much longer to learn. Brett Calloway's handcuffs were the last authority he ever held. The moment he put them on, Nadia Okafor Barnes's wrists on a Thursday afternoon in October, too tight on purpose, on a public street in front of a dozen recording phones, he set in motion every consequence that followed. Not because she was powerful, not because the system responded the way it should have responded to every person he had done this to before, but because this time, the woman in the handcuffs had a locked filing cabinet full of 30 years of documentation, a civil rights attorney who answered on the first ring, a retired judge with 27 years of parallel records, and a young courthouse clerk who had been writing things down in a private journal for 6 months and was waiting for someone she could trust to give them to. And because she gave herself 10 minutes to feel what it felt like. And then she went to work. Elias Okafor never got to see the courtroom he had spent his career trying to change. He spent 30 years filing cases, writing briefs, and documenting every instance of corruption he encountered in a metal cabinet in his study, and he died before any of it was used for what he had kept it for. But he left his daughter the car and the files, and the specific quality of attention that knows the difference between what the law says and what the law does, and more importantly, what you are obligated to do about that gap. He told her the law was a weapon. She became the person who decides how it is wielded in the room he had always wanted to reach. In the chair, no one who looked like him had been allowed to sit in until she sat down. The scratch on the Jaguar's door is still there. She drives it to the courthouse every Monday morning, the long way, past the curb on Clement Avenue where it happened. She doesn't slow down anymore. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel. We have more stories like this one coming. Don't miss them.